listening to a podcast from The Word.
We set people some homework last week, didn't we, Mark? We wanted to know what were the first cases of sampling. So people came in with various suggestions. It's really interesting. And it sent me down a rabbit hole, Mark. And I've emerged from the rabbit hole. And I have news, because I have discovered that, the source of the Nile, the beginning of sampling. I have discovered it. So stay tuned.
Oh, I think I have too, because I've been down in a rabbit hole as well. It's fascinating.
Good.
Go on, let's see what you got.
Well, I got all kinds of things. Like people suggested, obviously, I Am the Walrus by the Beatles has that bit near the end where you can hear a distant radio recording performance.
Sit you down, Father, rest you.
Sit you down, Father, rest you.
I remember that so vividly when it came out. I was so excited about it. I didn't know what it was.
Well, it was King Lear.
They spun the dial, didn't they, when they were recording?
It was live. It was on the radio on the day that they were doing it. And so it's John Gielgud, I think, starring and possibly directing as well. And so you get snatches of that. But there's very little from the 60s that would qualify as sampling. Although one thing was suggested to me by Matthew Brannigan, and thanks for that, Matthew. He suggested an extraordinary thing. Do you remember a TV program from 1960 called The Strange World of Gurney Slade, starring Anthony Newley? It only ran very briefly.
I never saw it, but I've heard of it, yeah.
You've heard of it. It's the sort of thing that became a cult years later. And the theme tune for that was done by a guy called Max Harris. And I'm going to try and play a little bit of it now. Let's see if you can hear this. Can you hear that?
Yeah.
And so forth. That's the piano. Do you hear the piano? That beginning of that? Okay. That piano, our correspondent thought might have been sampled from Parchment Farm by Mose Allison, which was a kind of cult hit from 1957. And it certainly sounds like it.
Just like it.
But I can't believe it was, because I can't believe in 1960 that they would allow sufficient time for a session to do that, to steal some of Mose Allison's Parchment Farm and to somehow loop it and to make it the basis of the theme tune from Gurney Slade. I think it was more like a case of Max Harris, who was the musician, who was apparently very well known as a highly skilled mimic, could hear anything and play it. That was probably a case of him playing it himself. So that's just one theory. Other things people suggested, Broken Arrow by Buffalo Springfield from the late 60s.
Oh, which has the burst of applause at the beginning, is that right?
It's screaming at the beginning. You hear screaming girls, and then you hear Buffalo Springfield playing Mr. Soul, their earlier hit. The screaming apparently comes from a Beatles concert.
That's brilliant. That reminded me of a kind of visual version of that, which was the Dave Clark 5 on Ready, Steady, Go. Do you remember that? They re-edited those Dave Clark 5 appearances with the Beatles audience.
Oh, right.
It's given away by the fact that they're screaming, they're going mental, which they clearly weren't going quite as mental after Dave Clark 5. And you can see, because in one of the pictures, in one of the shots, there's somebody holding an I Love Ringo banner or something, which rather gives it away.
Yeah. Well, that's what.
But do you think there's two different types? It struck me there's two different types of sampling, really. There's somewhere people just use bits of speech or whatever and just patch it into a kind of patchwork of sound. And there's another type where you use a piece of music from another record, another time, as an intrinsic part of the track.
Yeah.
Because I found, I don't know if this is the first case of sampling, I found a track which is called The Flying Saucer. It came out in 1956. By two guys called Buchanan and Goodman. And it's a comedy record, really. It's kind of Chris Morris type thing, where what they do is they tell a story, but they do it by using snatches of records. And so, you've got them saying things like, and you, the gentleman with the guitar, what would you do? And then you get Elvis Presley going, take a walk down Lonely Street. You know what I mean? And then someone else, they say, are you there? It's Smiley Lewis going, I hear you knocking. So they just built a story out of these little bits of things. But I think that the first, as far as I can see, one of the first examples of it actually being used on a record was sent in by Joel from Brighter Day Vinyl, old pal of ours, who said on the 1971 record called "He's Gonna Step on You Again" by John Kongos. Have you got that one?
Yeah, I've got it here. So play a bit of it. It's, I'll just take it from it. You probably know that one. It's the kind of thing that gets reissued regularly over the years. So what's sampled on that?
But he said that's is over a sound bed of a tape of African drumming. And it starts with African drumming. So that, I think, runs throughout the entire record. So that was his suggestion for the first kind of
round about
sample.
the same time, interestingly, round about the same time, on the French Barclay label, although it went on to be a hit all over the world, was a record called Burundi Black, which is based on the Burundi drummers, the drummers of Burundi, which was turned into kind of early disco record, was an absolutely enormous hit. And of course, what I only realised after we started thinking about this thing last week is Joni Mitchell's The Hissing of Summer Lawns, which is, 1974 or 5, I think. 1975, the second track is The Jungle Line, which is Joni Mitchell and guitar, a synthesizer, and then the drummers of Burundi. Absolutely all the way through it. I can't play that for you because it's not on Spotify. Thanks, Joni. But yeah,
I love the way that everyone thought that the Burundi beat was kind of invented by Malcolm McLaren and Bow Wow Wow and Adam in the end. So actually there's people using it a long time before.
10 years before. Yeah. Absolutely extraordinary. There's another personal favourite of mine is, if you listen to this, this is a record produced by Lee Perry in the very early 70s.
Oh, this cow thief skank.
Classic Lee Perry. It starts, that bit of music that you hear at the beginning of that, which bears no relation whatsoever to anything that comes later, is pinched straight off a Staple Singers record. And the reason it was done is that Lee Perry was obsessed with the fact that they had stolen The Return of Django, one of his masterpieces, for the beginning of I'll Take You There by the Staple Singers. You know, that famous guitar intro.
So he was just simply evening the score.
Evening the score. I can't do anything about it through the courts. I'm just going to hook a piece of your record and put it at the beginning of mine. So that was the irrepressible,
that's very funny,
comic majesty of Lee Perry.
Yeah.
But then it made me think, if you go back to your definition of, are you using it as music or not? You can take a record like Dark Side of the Moon. Dark Side of the Moon samples all kinds of things, but it does them in real time.
Oh, it's footsteps and heartbeats and cash registers.
The cash register, which is turned into a rhythm instrument on money, the alarm clock.
Yeah.
All that stuff. It was all done by Alan Parsons with a Ewer tape recorder, going around the corner and finding a clock shop that would wind everything up and let it off at the same time. So that very much uses it. But I tell you what, the discovery I made, or the reminder, is this led me back to, in 1979, because they'd just gone in the charts with I Only Want to Be With You, I was sent to interview for Smash Hits.
The Tourists? I did too.
And I went, okay, Brainsby's office, Tony Brainsby's office.
That's right.
Down in Earl's Court or somewhere like that, whatever. And I was talking to Dave Stewart. I can't remember how it came up, but Dave Stewart, obviously, boffin producer even then, He was telling me about a record he's enormously excited by, which had done something that nobody had done before, which was taken recordings off the shortwave radio of strange Middle Eastern singers and so forth, and had somehow put it together with a band in the studio. So it made a very different kind of music. And when I started thinking about this the other day, I thought, have I still got that record? And lo and behold, I'm a great believer in the fact that there are certain records you're never meant to be parted from, and thus you never are.
It's come back and found you.
Holger Czukay.
Oh, yes.
Holger Czukay of Cannes, although he left Cannes at the time, I think, he started doing this, and he made this record, which was not a hit or anything, but for the likes of Dave Stewart and probably a lot of people all over the world, scattered all over the world, this is a very different kind of sound. I'll just try and play a bit of it now, so you can get an idea.
Is this the record Movies? Is this?
Yeah. And you hear all kinds of voices that he's got off the shortwave radio. And it's just got that, it's just strange. It's just ethereal. It's like nothing you've ever heard before. It's like a dream, And I do think it's interesting that he chose to call it Movies, because that suggested it was a very different kind of music. You were making music in a very different way, Because prior to that record, you could say records of the 50s and 60s and 70s, they were made by performance, weren't they? People went to the studio and they had 3 hours, or they had longer if you're the Beatles or whatever. But they performed it, and what you heard on the record was what they performed. Was what Holger Czukay was doing, and what loads of people did later on, had more in common with putting together a movie, where it's not to do with real time at all.
It's editing, isn't it?
It's editing. It's putting things together in strange combinations and trying them in loads of different ways. Now, Movies, didn't make any great splash apart from Dave Stewart and so forth. But the record that came out 2 years later that did, and was doing it very much the same way, is Brian Eno and David Byrne, My Life in the Bush of Gold.
Yes.
It's just the same idea, but done in slightly more sophisticated fashion.
Lots of extracts, isn't it?
Lots of extracts.
Together. Yeah.
And then subsequently, of course, they had to withdraw the original version because they had religious complaints over the opening track, didn't they? So if you've got the original version, like
put it on eBay, or don't actually.
Don't
sit there and crow about it.
Don't do that.
Oh, wonderful!
But I do think it's interesting, that Holger, and Can did some fantastic records. I like Can, but I think Movies is a really pivotal record, actually. It's no doubt you can still hear it, via streaming services and so forth. But, you could take that view that from 1979 onwards, pop music is made in a different way.
Completely different. That's true. And 79, that's very early on, isn't it? I remember when the Moby records came out. And you kind of thought then this is something new. Do you remember Moby sampling all those old blues tracks?
Yeah.
And that seemed to be something really contemporary. But actually, as you say, it's been going on a long time before.
And then you start, and it's interesting, that happens just before hip-hop, really. And so hip-hop does the same thing, but really gleefully, makes a huge issue of I pinch absolutely everything, whatever
Rapper's
works.
Delight, Grandmaster Flash.
Yeah.
That was their whole thing, was that that's what we do.
Yeah. So, it's an interesting field. If anybody's got anything further to contribute, anybody thinks, well, no doubt we've forgotten there's loads of things we haven't talked about that we really should. It's fascinating to go back and to listen to that stuff with new ears.
The Word Podcast, prime cuts of popular culture served fresh each week.
There was a big kick-off this week about hashtag Bob Dylan core, which I thought was absolutely riveting. I mean, quite a lot of the old guard really got out their prams. Sylvie Simmons, old pal of ours, a journalist, was posted a thing about, "Sod it, I give up. Being a music magazine used to mean something," because Rolling Stone had been the people who kind of first tweeted this. But basically, it's about the idea that various people had seen the cover of Freewheeling Bob Dylan, recorded in February 1963, where he's going down, is it Jones Street? I think
Something
it is,
like that.
Canal Street, I can't remember, with Caesar Rotello, his girlfriend. And the photographer, Don Hunstein, had been taking some pictures in the flat and said, "Let's go outside and do some shots." And Dylan deliberately wouldn't wear warm clothes. It was perishingly cold.
It was the snow on the ground.
The snow, you can actually see the snow in the pictures.
Yeah.
And he goes out, he's wearing a really thin jacket because he thinks he looks really good in this jacket, which, to be fair, he does,
She's bundled up.
I read an interview with her not long ago, and she said she still hates that picture. She says, I look enormous because I'm wearing, for a start, I'm wearing one of Bob Dylan's old chunky jerseys. Very folk music, wearing his clothes, his old jumper, and then a great load of scarves. She looks like the Michelin Man, But anyway, they're walking down that street, and that's a fantastic sleeve. I mean, it was incredible at the time, A, because, there was somebody with their girlfriend on the cover, which was generally considered to be not a good thing, because pop stars are meant to be kind of available. But also, it was very beatnik, wasn't it? It was a very folk message, wasn't it? These two kind of bohemians, these beatniks kind of living together. It was an amazing image.
It is, Mark, just to interrupt. It's an important to keep in mind. It's a lifestyle statement.
It's a total lifestyle statement.
Everybody looked at that, 14 years old in 1964, and thought, oh, God, I want to be that. I want to have that life. I want to fly away from my little suburban world. And I want to go to the big city and just mooch around with hands in my pockets with a gorgeous girl who adores me. That's all anybody wanted.
On the way to a cafe where I'm going to have a stack of pancakes, because I believe that's what they eat in America, and then I'm going to write a brilliant lyric for a song.
Trust you to think about food. Yeah, go on.
Yeah. But anyway, it's I thought it was fantastic. And various people have picked up on this and started posting photographs of themselves wearing very thin jackets, aren't they, outside? And I just found two absolutely brilliant posts. There was one guy says, a jacket that isn't warm enough is essentially a Bob Dylan jacket. And another guy says, Bob Dylan, he says, he's a funny little guy who wears funny little outfits, and his music's good to listen to in the fall. His outfits are full-based. He just pulls off that look very well. I thought, that's a really good point, actually.
Yeah.
Because why should we sit here at our age, having grown up with Bob Dylan, and think, oh, no, it's all about the music. It's not all about the music.
No, because it's not.
These people are on TikTok, which is where all this took off. These people are very rarely listening to any music without knowing what the person who makes that music looks like. And therefore, the first thing they're encountering is the image and, the whole visual concept, And actually, I thought the point that Dylan was a fall or a kind of winter concept was a really good one, actually.
It's a good one.
I'd never really thought of that. If you think of those Dylan album sleeves, it's scarves, it's sheepskin coats, isn't it?
Suede.
It's blonde on blonde, it's the suede. It's John Wesley Harding.
Same jacket that he has on, 4 albums?
3 or 4 albums wearing the same jacket, exactly. It's Desire, it's Street Legal, it's Almost... There's something... Also, his music is winter music, actually. Yeah. I thought that was a really good point. It's about endurance, and it's about rigour, and it's about suffering, and it's about dark personal relationships a lot of the time. There's not much levity. And you don't see... I mean, most people, you get pictures of them all, the Beatles skipping around on beaches in Florida or whatever. You've never seen... Have you ever seen a picture of... Apart from maybe Nashville Skyline, actually, which is a very sunny record. But otherwise, he is a kind of... He's a dark winter concept. I thought that was really good.
Shelter from the storm.
Yeah. Absolutely. Some bands are summer concepts, Wham or Beach Boys or whatever. Obviously, that's different. But Dylan, I think, does... His music is fall music.
But if you look at those first, 4 album covers, they were all really powerful messages. And that first one, which is the least sophisticated one, he's wearing the cap, which you used to be able to send off to the back pages of the small ads in the Record Mirror and the NME for a Dylan cap, or later on it was called a Donovan cap. But basically it was like a cap. It was like a railway man's cap. It suggested folk singer. And
Princess Anne wore one at one point.
And then the second album that's freewheeling, isn't it? So he's with the girlfriend.
Yeah.
And then the third album is The Times They Are Changing, and it's shot from below, looking very dark, looking like, oh God, what's the name of that woman's picture of Okies during the Depression? Oh, there's a famous photographer who took pictures in the 30s and 40s of...
I know the picture.
I can't remember.
Yeah,
he looks like that. He was supposed to look like Woody Guthrie or, a great American primitive. And then there was another side to Bob Dylan, which that's where the theory rather falls apart, I suppose. But then later on you get Bring It All Back Home and Highway 61. Every picture was a message.
Oh yeah,
every picture you spent hours going through. What's going on there?
look what's in the background.
Yeah.
You know, so
particularly bringing it all back home because he had loads of little magazines and records and clues in front of him.
Absolutely. You know, so to say that Bob Dylan didn't understand the power of surfaces is just nonsense.
Yeah.
He understood it very, very well, probably better than anybody, actually. So, and
but don't
also,
you think that's the appeal? I can really understand that because I think half the appeal of Get Back, the Peter Jackson movie, is the look of the Beatles at that particular time. 90% of the reason that people are getting back into the Ramones is what the Ramones look like.
Of course it is.
You know, the people. I don't think I've met anybody. I can talk about people 30 years younger than us now who've got into the Byrds recently without somehow appropriating some of that Byrds look.
It's the hair.
You don't just listen to the Byrds. You look like a member of the Byrds. You wear a fringe jacket, don't you? You may even go as far as rectagonal sunglasses. I don't know.
You comb your hair forward, don't you? That's
rectagonal.
Basically. But also going back to Bob Dylan and freewheeling, there is nothing that says I want to be a rock star more powerfully than going out in unsuitable clothing. Nothing at all. You know what I mean? I'm sorry, it's a cry from the heart. Please take me seriously. Look how I'm suffering.
I'm suffering.
This is a junction in the Word podcast. It separates that bit from this next bit.
Well, there was a piece in Variety, I think it was, this week. Maybe this was the piece that had the headline, La Vie en Robots. I can't remember. I've read several, actually. But the Variety one points out that 60 years after her death, Edith Piaf is coming to life in a new biopic, which is going to use AI to recreate her voice and image. This is a really interesting story, isn't it? The voice bit I understand.
She's going to talk to you, though, isn't she?
Yeah, she is the narrator.
This is Disney. This is,
yeah.
You know, you can go. I think in Disneyland you can go into a room where various distinguished dead presidents of the United States will speak to you.
Yeah.
I think this is that, but taken to the power of 100. You know.
Well, they say it's a voiceover, so that's going to be a personal voiceover. Yeah. That's not going to be kind of. And then in 1937, in a French accent, did so. This is going to be. I was suffering. I was upset. He left me. I was miserable. I was living in a place lit by a 2-bar fire or whatever. You know what I mean? It's going to be that kind of thing. But anyway, they are recreating her voice by taking lots of recordings and feeding into AI computers. And I can see that would be convincing. I can be convinced by the sound of a voice that I would take as being her, you know. But it's the idea of the image. They're talking about the image. Now, as far as I can see, they're saying we want to come up with something that doesn't look too cartoonish. And I think what they're talking about is taking the sound of her records and creating a kind of a hologrammatic or whatever, an AI artificial image of footage that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So they're just making footage of her singing. And I thought that was interesting too. And it could be, you know, films are all about the suspension of disbelief, aren't they? They're, you know, you go and we went to see that Baz Luhrmann movie about Elvis. And by the end, you've sort of convinced yourself you are somehow watching Elvis. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's the same, I suppose, with people going to see the ABBA show, that you're convinced by the fact that these holograms are somehow kind of ABBA. You've bought into it, you know. And that made me think that if that was the case, is there not a market, if that was successful, is there not a market for going back and creating footage of people of which there is no footage at all?
Robert
Johnson. There is no live footage of Robert Johnson. There are 38 recordings or whatever, but you could fabricate that.
Nick Drake.
But Nick Drake, there is no live footage, absolutely. Billie Holiday, there's some, but there's not very much. Blind Willie McTell,
yeah.
Blind Blake, Bill Brunsey. These are people who all died in the, 30s or 50s, whatever. Bessie Smith, Rainey, Jelly Roll Morton. I mean, I just think of all these people that you could tell their story. I mean, it does sound unbelievably corny, but if you buy into it and it works,
but
then it'll probably happen.
Other interesting thing about the Piaf thing is in the statement I read, they were talking about there are many qualities and many themes in the Edith Piaf story that chime very strongly with people today. And so it's always interesting when you see these kind of statements, because it won't be long before somebody will be saying something about sexuality or being an outcast or and somebody who culturally doesn't fit and so forth, because that's what happens and already happens and will increasingly happen with the exploitation of the images and music of people who are no longer with us when they're no longer with us. Because even, I think we were talking about this the other week, when, I read an interview with Elton John's husband, producer, so forth.
David Furnish.
And he was talking about how they developed Rocket Man. The Rocket Man, they very definitely played up the parts of Elton's story that would appeal to an audience of 25-year-old moviegoers nowadays. Completely. Which is not necessarily anything to do with the true Elton John story at all, And so they're going to be looking for, the ways that they can turn Edith Piaf into Amy Winehouse is basically what they're going to do.
That's exactly it.
That is what they're going to do. And then in time, they'll do the same thing with Amy Winehouse and whoever. But,
Well, we felt the same when we went and saw that Elvis movie, didn't we? We thought that Elvis was recreated as someone who was incredibly respectful of all women, And, actually his reputation was somewhat different in real life. Different. But anyway, they just he'd been wokeified to some extent.
But I tell you, I'm kind of intrigued with AI and movies, and because I think there is an interesting dimension of movies that is kind of beyond realism, which I think might be quite interesting. It's I no longer find it possible to watch films which are supposedly set in the First or Second World Wars that feature actors who are all born in, 1995 or whatever.
Yeah.
Because they don't look like those people at all. They're all too well nourished. They're
Matt
all
Damon, fabulous hair, great skin.
I'm sorry, there was nobody in the trenches who looked like that in 1916 or whatever. And I often think, I'm a bit of a First World War, I won't say enthusiast. I read a lot about it, and you and
I've been to the First World War battle sites twice. In fact,
whenever I see a film that purports to bring home the kind of extraordinary business of the trench warfare in the First World War, I can never get through the film. I just turn it off. I just think it's ridiculous because it's too modern. You know what I mean? And I often think animation is the way to do this kind of thing. It's the only way to create a world that we can't possibly imagine, rather than trying to using the inadequate tools of contemporary actors. But that's what I think, anyway. So Edith Piaf, the Edith Piaf AI-generated biopic, personally, can't wait.
The Word Podcast. 2 cocoa tins and a piece of string.
Terrible story about this woman in her 70s who died at a Robbie Williams concert in Sydney, Australia. Did you read this?
I did read it.
After the concert. Because according to accounts, she was trying to get away from her seat quite quickly.
Well, there were 40,000 people leaving, weren't there, at the same time? And she just thought, the quickest way to do this is to climb over the seating and get to whatever she was trying to get to, some different exit or something. But she then finished up falling down 6 flights of stairs.
God.
I mean, that's appalling.
It's terribly, terribly sad. But I tell you, when I go to the theatre, if ever I'm in the gods at the theatre in the West End, people know what this is like. If you go up the top of, I don't know, the Gielgud Theatre or wherever, you're looking pretty much down on the stage, aren't you? Like directly down. The gradient is absolutely astonishing. And you're thinking, this is quite dangerous. It's a good job there aren't loads of people here who are in their 60s and 70s. Then you look around you and you're entirely surrounded by people in their 60s and 70s. There's nobody but people in their 60s and 70s in those seats in the West End Theatre. And there's such a dangerous environment generally, particularly if people are, trying to
trying to jump the queue. That's
people leaning out of boxes. Yeah, did you go to see that Dame Edna show years ago when part of the act was that somebody fell out of a box? Do you remember that?
Really?
We were there. It was absolutely incredible. We were down the front in the stalls, and there was suddenly a row, very loud row, in a box 2 floors up on our right. And suddenly this couple were there, and you could see them having this big argument. And the guy pushes the girl, and the girl falls out of the box and drops down towards the audience, but was actually dangling on a security rope. It's all part of the act, you know. I've never been in such an electrifying mode. It's extraordinary.
Oh, my God.
But anyway, the reason it worked is because you thought that's possible. You could fall out of one of those boxes. Grim.
Did I ever tell you about when I went to see Bruce Springsteen when he played in London, so was it 85, is it? 85? Yeah.
Yeah.
He did that week at Wembley Stadium. During, in the middle of the week, you had the 4th of July, and I went to like 5 shows there. Sat with Roger Scott, pretty much everyone.
Wow.
What a nice bloke Roger Scott was. Couldn't be a nicer person to sit there and watch Bruce Springsteen with. But anyway, on one occasion, it must have been an afternoon show, it must have been a Saturday or something. And because I remember it was daylight. Somebody somehow, the massive stage, and then this whole kind of proscenium arch built round the stage to kind of frame it all. And somebody somehow got on the stage and started climbing the scaffolding, and eventually went right to the top of the stage.
Oh, God.
So they were above the band.
So if they'd fallen off, they would have killed a member of the group. So didn't they stop the show?
No, because the band didn't know it was going on. That was the weird thing. You were in the audience with however many,
and you can see this probably quite pissed character. Waving a bottle of rouge.
Yes, or whatever. Either piss or just stupid or nauseating, or who would do that? What kind of dick would do that?
Yeah.
And but the only people who couldn't see were the people on stage. And so the audience were, understandably somewhat distracted. Because, A, it's an annoyance. B, I don't wish to have my enjoyment of the concert, spoiled by witnessing a death.
Yeah, Clarence Clements destroyed by...
Well, 2 deaths, or whatever.
Plummeting from the...
God. So if anybody was there... and can also remember that occasion, get in touch. I'd like to have my memory confirmed. I see all is not well in the world of Daryl Hall and John Oates, Mark. This is a weird one, isn't it?
That's a weird story. The announcement is, although we don't quite know why, is that there has been a restraining order taken out, isn't that right?
Yes.
Over Daryl Hall. Now, over John Oates, rather. So what John Oates has done, I really don't know.
Nobody knows.
I mean, it's interesting thing is that actually they made a record. No, they didn't make a record. Sorry, they toured, didn't they? In October 2022. So it's only a year ago. Yeah. But he has since, this is Daryl Hall, given an interview saying, people think that John Oates is my partner. He's my business partner. He's not my creative partner. He said, we've always been very separate, and that's a really important thing for me. Mm-hmm. So basically, something has happened, which can only be, Dave, that there's been some kind of threat or some physical threat or something. Why would you place a restraining order on somebody? Does this mean that this is obviously just a supposition on our part that he's been going around and banging on Daryl Hall's windows or whatever? I mean, I don't know what. What does that mean? I mean, people have fallen out. There have been lots of very famous fallings out, haven't they? The Everleys, the Everleys could bear to be in the same. They could only meet on stage and even then wouldn't look at each other. Eagles, Sam and Dave, same thing, Simon and Garfunkel. I mean, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. But the idea that none of them has gone as far as taking a restraining order out on another member of the group.
It is pretty extraordinary. Because what you have to remind yourself is that Daryl Hall and John Oates really go back a long way. Didn't they meet in 1967 or something like that?
Yeah.
They were playing in bands around Philadelphia and just got to know each other and play together. And, their first albums, was it Whole Oats, that first one, and the Abandoned Luncheonette, all those records they made long before they had hits,
Yeah.
So they really put the years in, all the notes. And if they really didn't like each other all that time,
I know.
It must have been something of a trial, that.
But to say he's not my creative partner is pretty damning, isn't it?
It is really.
I mean, the suggestion there is that this guy just got lucky because I told him what guitar parts to play and what to sing.
Yeah.
And I'm the kind of musical architect of the whole venture.
Yeah.
So I just thought it was amazing. There's something just completely gripping about it.
Yeah. So
often with groups, if there's a member of the group who's just you can't quite deal with, and it happened to Mick Jones and Pete Doherty and David Crosby and Lindsey Buckingham to some extent, then you just get rid of them. Then they're suddenly not invited in the group anymore. But when you're only a duo, it's quite difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, and also here's the terrible thing is that everybody knows that Daryl Hall is the kind of he's the singer, isn't he? Really,
yeah.
He's the front man. All that.
Yeah, completely.
And okay, how much could you get for a ticket for Daryl Hall? I would suggest not a lot of money.
No,
how much would you get for a ticket for Daryl Hall and John Oates? Quite a lot of money.
Yes, you would.
It's as simple as that, They're umbilically connected, whether they like it or not. It's like, it's like Simon and Garfunkel, isn't it?
It is.
It's a classic case, Although Garfunkel, to be fair, sang lead on an awful lot, and so a lot of the best known, stuff and so forth. Where I don't think the same thing applies to John Oates.
Yeah.
So, now, talking of friendship. I see that it appears to be the end of the road, finally, for Top Gear. Have you followed this?
Yes, I've been following it very closely. It was a very good interview with James May on the Today programme. I've got a lot of time for James May. He's a really bright guy.
Well, I've got a lot of time for the whole thing. So if people don't know this, he's brought to an end by this terrible accident that happened to Freddie Flintoff, who's been latter-day kind of presenter of it, which is clearly just appalling, life-changing, accident. And obviously the powers that be decided this game is not worth the candle any longer, And I think that's wholly right. But
which also followed the Richard Hammond accident.
Well, absolutely.
I mean, Richard Hammond. I was reminded of the fact that Richard Hammond's car, was in a jet-propelled car, was travelling at 320 miles an hour when he had his accident. I mean, that is he's going about almost 3 miles a minute.
That's considerably faster than a Formula One car. It's
astonishing.
That's ridiculous. So, taking the long view of Top Gear, just bear with me here, okay?
Yeah.
It seems to me that Top Gear, there are kind of 3 stages in the life of Top Gear. There was the early stage with William Woolard and so forth, yes, that nobody remembers. And then there's the later stage with Freddie Flintoff and his couple of partners and so forth, which really nobody remembers. And then there's that bit in the middle, which was when Jeremy Clarkson
in The Hamster and
James May.
Yeah.
From my understanding, was they were going to can it, weren't they? The format it wasn't working at all, and then that was pretty much Last Chance Saloon. Has anybody got an idea how this program can be done? And so they came along with the producers and so forth. This is the way it can be done, and there then followed this golden age of golden ages. All TV programs in their long history have a kind of golden age. That was the ultimate golden age, wasn't it?
Because the idea presumably was they changed it from being a kind of program for kind of car boffins to being for petrol heads, wasn't it? It was just like people who want to go out and just, I can remember seeing one episode where they were I think in India, the one where they're trying to get to somewhere, Calcutta, whatever, and 3 different cars. Do you remember that one?
Yeah.
James May was driving a Rolls Royce. And he drives this Rolls Royce completely to the ground. He wrecks this car by just driving over kind of rough terrain and things like that. And it sort of appealed to the kind of inner schoolboy, don't you think?
Absolutely. Well,
I think the thing about that program was so amazing. It gave you, as some of the men's magazines did at the time, is it gave you an incredible insight into the male mind.
This is it.
Everything is played for laughs.
This is it, because, it worked because of the three of them.
Yeah.
And the key person, and I know he's a controversial figure, but the key person, I don't care whether you like him or not, is Jeremy Clarkson.
Yeah.
It works because he's the big guy and he's the leader and he's slightly the naughtier of the three.
Yeah.
And the whole appeal of Top Gear was naughtiness.
Yeah.
That's what made it work. We're going to do things we really didn't ought to be doing.
Yeah, dangerous driving, winding each other up, practical jokes.
And I have no interest in the concept whatsoever once they take it to Amazon. No interest, because it's no longer school. There's nobody to be naughty for at all.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's Amazon. It's the world of streaming. Nobody cares. You can do what you like.
Yeah.
Whereas you're doing it for the BBC, that's different.
Yeah.
It's had that feeling, they've gone a bit far this time.
They're going to get into trouble, as indeed they did, for very good reasons. I mean, it's some appalling things.
Of course it did appalling things. But I just want to say one thing. The core of Top Gear is that period when there were three of them. The core is Jeremy Clarkson. And the key thing that Jeremy Clarkson had is the thing that every single television producer or radio producer will tell you until they're blue in the face, even though they have no experience of doing it whatsoever. They will always say, talk to them as if you're talking to one person. Yes? And we all know intellectually that's the right thing to do. Let me tell you, Mark and I can tell you this, because we've done a little bit of this years ago. This is a really hard thing to do. It's a really difficult thing to do. And Jeremy Clarkson had that God-given skill to be able to look at a camera and talk as if he was just talking to one person.
Incredible. I can still remember moments he did it. There's one when he's in a lift at the BBC and he says something slightly un-PC about a girl he fancies in the office. And he just turned to the camera and said, I said that out loud, didn't I? I thought, that is just so clever. She's saying that to me. I said out loud. That's the contents of my brain there.
Absolutely.
And I've let you give you a little insight. It's incredible.
Yeah, so, I think it's quite right that Top Gear probably is knocked on the head because, everything has its day. But let's not forget what made it so good.
And also, just one other thing is just that the kind of in-jokery of it was so like magazines. The Stig, The Stig was an absolutely genius thing. The Stig used to go, this is the original Stig, it was Perry McCarthy, used to go to the programme in wearing his helmet. So when he arrived, you couldn't see who he was. He used to put on an accent so no one knew it was his voice. He used to get change in his own little place. He used to eat his sandwiches at lunchtime when no one could see him. And he kept from the actual production company themselves the secret of who he was. Isn't that amazing?
It is.
And now goes out on well, there's an irony, on the kind of after-dinner circuit, telling stories about it. The man who wasn't allowed to speak.
The Word Podcast. Fix yourself a drink and it's like being in the pub.
And now we're joined by birthday boy Simon Poulter. Hello, Simon. Happy birthday. When was it? Is it still to come or has it been?
I still think it's going on because the cards are still up, but it was the 11th.
He's got cards.
That's so nice. You still have
good
cards.
Good to know. It's good to know.
When you get to our age, it's not quite so rigorously celebrated.
No.
Shrugged off. There we are.
I tend to keep them up until Advent.
All right.
Fair enough.
Okay. So, Simon, you've got a log you want to throw on the conversational fire, as is traditional in this occasion. What is it?
Yes. Well, many, many, many years ago, I used to do a little bit of music journalism for a living when it paid money. And I, amongst all the different reviews that I used to write, I mean, I wrote a review once of an album by Dead Can Dance that I absolutely hated. And I later got absolutely excoriated for because I was basically messing with what people seem to think was a deity. So I just thought, with you guys having written so much over the years, there must be a review that you've written that you've sort of regretted afterwards and thought, and when people have basically taken you to task and say, you can't say that?
That's a good theme, actually. Deities, it's for another day. There are certain bands like Cocteau Twins, Bell and Sebastian, Prefab Sprout. There's certain groups you could not say anything remotely negative about. But anyway, what about you, Dave?
It gets worse, this. I'll tell you, it's interesting you should raise this, because for years, nobody ever came back at you on anything at all. Because they understood that you were writing for print, and, it lasts the week or month or whatever. Since print stopped, this is the odd thing that's happened, is that people now refer to things in print as if they're kind of holy writ.
Yeah.
Nobody ever comes back to anybody and anything they wrote on the Guardian website 10 years ago, because that's just understood that just disappears, whatever. Whereas if you committed this to paper, people occasionally post things. I find people occasionally post things on social media with little tears of, all things I've done or whatever. Go, I see you didn't like Dexy's Midnight Runners or whatever, And I think, for crying out loud, no, I didn't. And fair enough, I still don't. And it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Because what I always say is other opinions are available. If you want them, you can have one of your own, for instance, or you can go and have mates who have different ones. Why does it bother people so much that somewhere there is a minority view of something, as if nowadays we've all agreed on what the canon is?
It's a consensus, isn't it?
It's a complete consensus.
Yeah, we're all agreed, all right-thinking people agree that Dexy's Midnight Runners are marvellous. And now we found this heretic from back who's going to be burnt at the stake, hung, drawn and quartered. It's terrible.
It's ridiculous. It's now got to the stage where kind of the rock canon is now, there's more agreement around it than there used to be in the kind of 19th century literature canon. It really is like that. It's as if it's completely stopped. And we all agree that Nirvana were wonderful and the Clash were godlike and all these kind of things. And then all they ever do is add people to this canon. They never take anybody away. You know what I mean? Everybody eventually is in the canon. Everybody's approved of. Everybody's wonderful.
Because there's always someone somewhere flying the flag for them, isn't there? Therefore
there is.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, you've caught me. You caught me
touched
on
a raw nerve there.
Very, very clearly. But I mean, what was the difference though between, say, getting a phone call from a record company press office, and getting the letter from the fan?
Oh well, I mean, the record companies they understood it was all it was the hurly-burly of reviewing, wasn't it? And sometimes they did really well out of it, and sometimes they did less well out of it. It didn't matter.
And sometimes a bad review, promoted a certain amount of publicity, actually, and got people talking about things. So it's quite good.
Yeah, it's just, people, it's the tone of the way people respond is still very much the kind of wounded and rather priggish tone of the letters column, which is, I see you've given the so-and-so album to so-and-so to review, and he really should wash his ears out or whatever. He's clearly missing the majesty of whoever it is, you know what I mean? And it's just, it doesn't matter.
The people it really mattered to was the people that you slagged off, the actual bands. That was the thing. You didn't mind meeting the odd reader who'd, fan who was a bit aggrieved, but meeting them, I can remember meeting the Psychedelic Furs after I'd given and the Skids after I'd given their albums very poor reviews. That was terrifying, actually. They were very upset.
Of course, the thing about bands is they always claim never to have read them at all, and then quote them to you at great length.
That's right.
Because clearly they have read them, and they've read them hundreds of times over and over again to themselves.
They go to bed at night just repeating lines. They'll go to their grave with them,
Which is why I genuinely do not read reviews of books of mine that get reviewed. I don't read them at all because I've discovered that reviews always upset you. Doesn't matter whether they're favourable or unfavourable. they always upset you. There's something about them,
That's absolutely true.
It's really true.
Because whatever they latch onto is not probably what you intended or whatever. It's just, and they'll say something that's factually wrong or, it's just destabilizing.
But I'll tell you the other thing about reviewing, sorry, you've got us going now. I'll tell you the other interesting thing about reviewing the singles. I don't know if you ever did this. Reviewing the singles, like Danny Begg used to do it for the NME or whatever. And I used to do it for Smash Hits quite a lot. Mark did as well. We all did.
Yeah.
And when you have a load of singles to review, first of all, you've got to find the kind of 15 out of the 50 that you're going to review. So that takes a long time. And then you have to think of something to say about 15 records. And what happens is you start to resent every bloody record. Because it's really hard to do.
It's hard work, and it's also much easier to be funny when you're being disparaging. It's really hard to be funny when you're saying something's absolutely brilliant. You come up with some terrific metaphor about how genius it is. But actually, it's very, very much easier to say that things are rubbish. So you kind of that's the default position, really.
And of course, it's now gone. It's just disappeared totally with print media, hasn't it? Really, I'm sure there's nobody sitting there reviewing the singles this weekend anywhere on planet Earth, aren't there? Do you think there will be? What do you think, Simon?
Well, I mean, I used to do a little bit of it, and it was always a bit of a rush because on the magazine that I wrote for, it was like the last thing in the production schedule was get the reviews out, which basically meant sitting there at some ungodly hour with a stack of records, working your way through, and as you say, trying to come up with something original each time. And not resorting to simply, well, this sounds a bit like their last one, or this sounds, and as you say, trying to be funny as well, or very pompous, whichever way you went, was a nightmare.
It's really hard work. Anybody who thinks it's easy hasn't tried it whatsoever. And you know what the truth is? The only honest review of any pop record is this. Write it down. 3 stars. All right, if you like this kind of thing. If you like
that kind of thing. That's right. But the trouble is the only ones that people review are 5 stars or 1 star.
Yeah.
Because you're bound to get some kind of extremes that make it gripping,
Yeah. So, well, I'm glad Simon, you've provided a worthwhile public service in giving me an excuse to get that off my chest.
It's therapy. We should do this once a week. He feels better already. He'll sleep well tonight.
This is a new word in your ear, slot.
It is. What gets my goat? We used to have a column called What Gets My Goat in one of the magazines. I can't remember which it was.
We did.
What Gets My Goat with Andy Gill, was it? I can't remember. Maybe it was with you. I can't remember. Very good.
Well, look, Simon,
very nice to see you.
Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for your log on the fire.
And thanks for your support.
Happy birthday, and thank you for your support, which we hope we can continue to enjoy.
The Word Podcast, one of the few things you really need in life.
Well, we're joined by Kevin Walsh. Kevin, splendid to see you, our birthday guest. Happy birthday. Now, you've got an absolutely brilliant conversational log, which is you sent us an email saying that I think of the last 16 books, I think that we've talked about or reviewed or interviewed the authors or whatever on the podcast, you bought all of them, and I think you've read. How many of those have you read so far?
So by my count, there's been 28.
Oh, 28,
you guys
sorry.
Talked about in 2023.
Yeah.
And I've read 17 of them now. I read one since I sent the email to you. So that was the immediate records.
All right. Fantastic.
And then there's about 11 that I haven't gotten to, and there's one that I haven't gotten, which is the Island record one, which is not available here until December. And it's expensive. Yeah,
it's expensive to mail to America. I mean, that thing weighs a ton.
Yeah.
It's a foot square. But look, tell us which ones you liked.
So, gosh, that's such a great question. I loved the first one that I loved was, gosh, let me reference it here if I can. The Peter Asher one.
Kevin's got a huge pile in front of him. The danger is that it'll be like Jenga or whatever, pull out one and they'll all
pull out the Nick Drake book.
Yeah. Peter Asher one I thought was absolutely spectacular. I didn't realize. I guess I was alive in the 70s, so I knew what the music situation was like just on my AM radio. I didn't realize how much of that music he was responsible for or directly involved in. which was amazing. I loved I read 2 books by the guy who wrote the James Bond and the Beatles.
Book. John Higgs.
John Higgs. The KLF book is fantastic too.
The KLF book was amazing. I've been telling all my friends they've got to read it. Like, I have to tell you, I don't think that I've ever heard a note of KLF music. And I found the book so fascinating. And even the footnotes, which hilariously he's kind of apologetic for the whole time. But, it is actually so interesting. It's almost like having him sitting by you and commenting like, yeah, that paragraph doesn't really hang together very well. But
yes.
It's really, it's just fascinating. I thought that was great. And then the last one, I guess I would say, is the Bee Gees one, the Bob Stanley Bee Gees one.
All right, good. Good.
Yeah, which again, I first encountered the Bee Gees on Saturday Night Fever, right? And it very quickly became kind of cheesy and something that I was too cool for. But God, reading that through was just amazing, because they've had like 3 or 4 careers at this point, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Remarkable.
Definitely.
Well, the psychedelic records they made, the late 60s, early 70s psychedelic records are fantastic, actually. Mining Disaster, all those tracks.
So how do you get through all these things? What do you one a week or something? Or you must do
about
more
1 week.
One.
Yeah. I try to read at night before I go to sleep, and I will admit, this is something I don't want as you would say, the good lady wife to hear necessarily, but I have bought some of these also on audiobook, so I can listen to them in my car.
Right. Yeah.
But
it's so funny. You're really talking the word in your ear language. You were talking about the GLW. That's very funny.
That's right. Yeah.
So you were wondering what we would recommend as well.
Yes.
Additional.
Yeah.
What would you?
What are the great rock books? I mean, you guys are both writers, so I think this would be a fascinating thing to hear.
One that we reviewed, I think it might have been last year or maybe 2 years ago now, which you may already have read, was the John Cooper Clarke. I've got it here, actually. Yeah, I want to be Yours, by John Cooper.
I have not read that, although I do have that over here as well.
It's fantastic. It really is good. It's about the fabric of life in the 50s and 60s. It's about what's on the telly. You probably have got it there.
He's got it there.
Have?
Kevin Walsh, he got more books than Amazon.
You must read it. It's just incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, I have not
yet read that. And also Viv Albertine's book, which I think is called Clothes, 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 Music, 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 Boys, Boys, Boys. I think it's very, very good.
Oh, yeah, that one I do not have. I'll have to track that one down.
Yeah.
The great classics I always go back to again and again. A What Bopaloo Bopple Bum Boom by Nick Cohen, which is the kind of first rock book that I remember. Yeah. I remember reading. Revolution in the Head by Ian MacDonald, obviously the Beatles one, and I was the Peter Gralnick Elvis books. Have you read those?
Yes, I have. Those are excellent. Yeah, so good.
Those are the ones I always go back to. The ones that I always want to read have never been written and never will be written. I'd like to read a really good book about Randy Newman, and I don't think it's ever going to happen.
Why will that not be written?
I don't know, because a publisher, he's just not box office, I suppose.
No, he's not.
You wouldn't. A publisher would say, "There's no point. Nobody's going to buy a book about Randy Newman."
Well, they are, but just not very many people. Yeah.
But you wouldn't think somebody would buy a book on Peter Asher either necessarily. And here it is.
The difference is Peter Asher. To be fair, Peter Asher will go around and do the chat shows and talk on the radio and all. You know what I mean? And he's really good at it.
And also, there's a lot of dimensions to Peter Asher's story. You're covered straight into the whole Beatles network, which is a very lucrative thing. Yeah. So whereas Randy Newman's just about Randy Newman, really. Yeah. And that's different.
But maybe
tell me about you. Do you guys know Ian MacDonald? You must have known him. He was sort of a contemporary of yours. Is that true?
I don't remember ever meeting him.
No, I didn't overlap with him quite at the NME. He stopped working at the NME, I think, in about 77, 78 when I started. Like that. So I never met him, and he died when we were at Word, I think, even in about 2002 or something. So I'd love to have met him. I mean, that book, I reread it all the time. It's fantastic, I think.
I do too. It is my go-to. When somebody tells me I'm interested in the Beatles, it is my go-to thing that I give them. I give them that one. I give them the When John Met Paul book, which is a thin little, about less than 100 pages, and it's sort of almost like a poem. and the guy has gone back and looked at the shipping forecasts and all the stuff from that day. Gosh. It's very detailed in some ways, but there's also not a lot of detail about what actually happened.
Oh, so you mean it's about the when they meet
just that day?
Just that day.
Yes, the specific day. Yes,
it's a whole book about the one day. That's amazing.
I think I've heard of that, but I've never read it.
It's called When John. I'm going to have to get hold of that. When John
met Paul.
So, Kevin, well, lovely to talk to you. So, when you go to bed tonight, what are you starting on? Whatever Happened to Slade, or
So the one that I'm partway through right now,
Reach for the Stars.
Yeah, the one that I'm partway through right now is the Dylan one. The Dylan backing.
The musicians.
One. Yes, that's a really good book. That's good.
Which I'm really enjoying so far. I just saw Bob Dylan on Tuesday, so that was
great.
Yeah, that was a remarkable thing as well. And you Dave, you prepared me for it a little bit because in fact he was doing what you said. Everybody on stage is dressed in black, including him, but he's got a white hat.
Oh, that's what Mark was talking about. That.
Yeah, the white hat. Yeah. That's right. There's a guy
what a great piece of what a great piece of sort of stagecraft, you know.
It's very theatre. It's very clever.
That is every bit as much theatre as, I don't know, Devo or Yes or anything like that. It's just those little gestures. They're really important.
This podcast was brought to you by The Word.